Hello and welcome, fellow lifelong learners. Thanks for joining me for One More Thing, a radio show all about cultivating our most valuable asset, our mind, and fostering a sense of curiosity to learn one more thing. We feature passionate practitioners and seasoned experts in numerous areas of interest for lifelong learners of all ages. One More Thing is sponsored by Kiffin & Company, a corporate learning and talent development consulting firm, and I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert, a certified professional in talent development, learning advocate, and your fellow lifelong learner. Welcome to the show. I was a teenager when the Disney animated version of Pocahontas was released. In my recollection, it is one of the few Disney movies that doesn't end with a happily ever after, which I admittedly was disappointed by. Yes, I am sappy that way. Additionally, at the time, I never even thought about how factual the depiction was. I just enjoyed that the story showed how two people could bring peace among their respective communities, Pocahontas with her tribe and John with the English settlers. As an adult, realizing that the Disney movie was a factually inaccurate, overly romanticized version of the story was disappointing. Most notably, Pocahontas was only a child, not even a teenager, when she saved John Smith's life. John was a grown man in his late 20s, and there's no evidence of any romantic involvement between the two. I could go down a rabbit hole here, but I won't. I remember learning about various Indian tribes in school from an early age, and specifically about Pocahontas, albeit a rosy version. But strangely, I don't remember learning much about her tribe. Her father, Powhatan, was the chief of a group of smaller tribes, most of which I had never even heard of, in what is now the state of Virginia. My guest today is an active member of one of those tribes and has been part of helping establish the governance of that tribe, which just gained federal recognition in 2018. My fascinating conversation with her is coming up right after this.
Maximize impact with tailored solutions by partnering with Kiffin & Company. Developing your team is an investment, but it doesn't have to be just an expense. Discover more at kiffinandcompany.com and start your journey to effective learning today.
I want to welcome Desiree Dyer to the show today. Desiree is an enrolled citizen of the Upper Mattaponi Tribe, a federally recognized sovereign government in King William, Virginia. She also works for the tribe as Director of Services and Grant Operations, serves as an elected legislative representative to the Upper Mattaponi Council, and as a member of the Governance, Administration, and Economic Development Steering Committees. I'm sure she's going to tell us what all that means. Previously, she was the IT administrator for the Nashville Symphony. Desiree is also an autistic self-advocate and serves on the board for Autism Tennessee. On a personal note, Desiree is a wife to Ben and a stepmom to Ben's teenage daughter, Bella. Desiree, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I thought we would start you out with a tongue twister and then just get into things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate all the notes, though, because when looking at your title and knowing your elected position with the council, but not knowing exact title, so I appreciate you giving me the exact there.
Yeah.
Well, let's just start out with, first of all, telling us what should we know about the Upper Mattaponi Tribe? Because I honestly, when we first talked about it, I didn't even know that there were, I hate to say new tribes because that's not the right word, but you learned about the Cherokee and the Navajo and all the different tribes throughout school and stuff in history, but this is not one I'd ever heard of. So if you'll tell us a little bit about the tribe itself and then your roles with it, let's get us started there.
Sure. The good news is you may not have heard of the Upper Mattaponi specifically, but everyone knows the story of Pocahontas and Captain John. We are of those people. We are of the Powhatan Nation, right? The historic name, I think, whitens to Powhatan. So Powhatan was Pocahontas's father. We are part of the Powhatan Nation that was around in the 1600s. So we are a first contact tribe. Most people haven't heard of us because in Virginia in like the 1920s, there was a man, his name was, no, we're not even going to talk about his name because he doesn't deserve it, who really tried to erase us from like paperwork to say that natives didn't exist. You could choose white or colored at the time. And so a lot of people have not heard of us because we have been sort of fighting to be recognized even just on paper since the 1920s. But we're all still here. I am Upper Mattaponi through my mother's side of the family. My grandmother is about to be 98 in October, and she's the oldest living member of our tribe.
Oh, wow. That's neat. Now, you said first contact tribe, I think is the words that you use. What does that mean?
When Captain John and his merry band of plunderers arrived in Virginia in 1607, 4? I forget which.
Early 1600s.
Yeah, exactly. The early 1600s. We were the first peoples that they encountered. So first contact with like European settlers.
I think I remember reading that the state of Virginia recognized y'all in the 80s, but it has really been within the last few years that you've been federally recognized. So tell
That's
us a little
right.
bit more about that.
Yeah, 2018. So our fair senator here in Virginia, Tim Kaine, since Tim Kaine was elected to office, he's really been pushing for federal recognition of these first contact Virginia tribes.
With the recognition, I think I understand that it was not just your tribe. There was a group of tribes, correct?
That's
7?
correct. There were 7. Yeah,
So, and they were all Virginia-based tribes. Is that correct as well?
correct.
Okay, so
Yes.
I do want to point out that it was not just one tribe. It was 7.
So in 2018, Congress passed the bill that gave us federal recognition. President signed the bill into law, and we were all of a sudden entitled to like basically a government to government relationship with the United States. And as a federally recognized tribe, that means a government to government relationship also with like the state of Virginia, the county of King William. So it's been a really interesting experience to say like we are now an inherently sovereign people and government.
Well, I
Yeah.
want to get into your roles both as all three, a citizen, a legislative elected official, and as now a full-time staff person for the
Right.
government of the tribe. But before we do that, so you said that you are related to this tribe through your maternal grandmother. So
Mhm.
did you grow up knowing all about the tribe and understanding the history, or has that been something that you learned in more recent years or just as an adult?
Yeah, so I would say it's always been sort of something we openly talked about, but that one of the things that is true about the Upper Mattaponi is because of all the things and that we had to combat here in Virginia legislatively, also as like King William here is a very rural community. A lot of people left and moved to Philadelphia for like jobs and education for their children. My great grandmother and her husband were part of that group of people who left. You know, it was still something we always talked about. No one was trying to pretend we weren't Upper Mattaponi. But generationally, as we sort of got further and further away from the people who left, fewer and fewer people came back. I did not grow up knowing anything about, like, I couldn't have gotten in my car and said, this is where we're going to go, because I just didn't know. I told somebody a really funny story recently that, like, the last time I was here in Virginia, before I started like sort of doing this service work, which I got back involved with because COVID happened and everything went online. But I was probably 6 or 8 years old, and I literally thought the tribe was at like King's Dominion amusement park. Like didn't understand that like they're actually kind of out in the middle of nowhere in this very rural community. I was like, we have to go to King's Dominion, and they'd be like, it's King William. But for like so much of my childhood, I was like, the tribe lives in King's Dominion.
So then probably that part, a big piece of that is because it was not a recognized tribe, so there wasn't all of the more formality or the
And
formal
like opportunities, yeah,
right.
funding and opportunities and programming that we've been able to do since we got, I mean, one of the things that comes with federal recognition is like this influx of cash from the federal government. And it doesn't mean that like, oh, we're all now wealthy and it's crazy out here because there's a lot of like stipulations around how you can use that money. But yeah, that's a lot of it is just the opportunities didn't really exist in the ways that they do now because we didn't have that recognition.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so to lead us into then your roles, it sounds like from something you just said, is that you kind of got back involved in it because of COVID. So, tell us how that happened, and then lead us into the roles that you are playing now within the tribe.
Yeah, in 2020, the government, just like anything else, shut down. So we got federal recognition in 2018. In 2020, we were, trying to work through like, okay, what does that mean? Now we are a government and we can have a constitution and we can get federal monies. And there were a lot of decisions to be made. And the pandemic like just shut it all down. So what they ended up doing was like tribal meetings. We've for time immemorial, there has been a monthly citizens meeting, but it was basically only open to whoever could show up across the street at our school that was open
Mm,
for, for Native kids back at, when segregation was still a thing. So everything went on Zoom, and immediately I was like, all right, let's do this. And since then, I think probably the number of meetings that I've missed, I can count on like less than one hand. And I just got on and started to like learn and listen and find out what was going on locally and find out what the important issues were and what the programs were that they were trying to build. In that process, they said, we have a government now. Would anybody like to volunteer to be on a committee to help write the Constitution? Yes, please. I would love to do that. So me and several other citizens, along with an attorney, went through the process of like building a tribal constitution to like formalize the government. It was ratified just last year in July of 2023. After that was done, it separated out the powers. So council used to just be like, it used to be like a business, like a nonprofit board. Now that it was a government, we were going to spin off the executive, the chief and assistant chief into an executive branch, and the council would become like a legislative body. Awesome. One of the things that we wrote into the Constitution was that there would have to be one at-large member because we do have a large population that does not live like local to the tribal grounds,
mhm.
to be outside of a 100-mile limit. And the council at the time was like, you did a great job on the Constitution. We feel like you really understand like what our people need. You did great service in that. Would you be willing to be appointed to that position in the interim between like now and when we have our first election? I was like, okay. Decided to run. And then about 6 months later, like a citizen who was one of the employees called and was like, Desiree, I feel like some stuff is really is weird around here. I'm having some problems. I'm feeling a little crazy. Am I gaslighting myself? So we kind of, talked through the issues that she was seeing, and I was like, no, you're not crazy. And, called up the speaker of council and was like, hey man, there's some real like weird things going on. I think that like the departments could use some support. I think that, they're not getting the resources that they need. And there's just a lot of confusion about like what the mission is and where things are going. And I supervise specifically housing, environmental, elder care, and we have a program management office. Several of those are like citizen facing, and I just help them like keep their grants in compliance, look out for other like opportunities to like grow and bring in more funding, help them with their like project planning, and just sort of start to build out relationships. I bring in the grant money. I figure out how we can like best use it. What are the projects that we need to fund? What are the improvements that need to be made to like either our citizens or the area? And yeah, we're getting ready to hire a community services director who will report to me. We're gonna in the future. There's a social worker who will come on. So it's pretty exciting. We're doing a lot of growing, and this ties into the whole like lifelong learning because I am learning. I am absorbing information like from a fire hose, and
Right.
it's like federal regulations and grant compliance and business startup policy creation and process creation and yeah, all
Yeah.
from scratch. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it seems like it would be such an incredible experience and one that it's hard to fathom in our current, in our generation, this idea of setting up a government because everything was set up, for 200 plus years ago, whatever. And so to be a part of creating the constitution for the tribe and setting up all of the legislative process and everything, that's just got to be incredible. And your grandmother must be so proud.
When I got the job, we definitely had a conversation that like we laughed and we cried and we laughed and we cried and we laughed and we cried. Yeah.
Yeah. Was she
Yeah.
involved in all this time? You were saying that with the monthly meetings, it was all just folks that were around the area. Is she in the area? Was she able to continue to
She
participate?
she lives in Florida.
So she hasn't been able to participate either then.
No, no. I will say, like, citizens meetings are extraordinarily dry. You have to be a little bit more of a policy wonk. I'm trying to change the nature of these monthly meetings so that they're not so boring. So people who don't live close by will want to be involved, and people who do live close by will want to be more involved. Like, you can have like a citizens meeting, but it's not fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So
and
that's
I know that you were definitely a fun person when we had the call to, get all of our ducks in a row for this show. I mean, I feel like we were laughing half the time. So
right. Yeah, totally. I really am a firm believer that you just have to gamify everything. And like that's fine. There are people like me who love all the dry, boring it's why I ran for office, right? I love the law. I love like, thinking about legislation. It's why I'm good in this job because like I love policy, I love all that stuff. It's my jam. But also I understand that like that is not people's jam. So how can we make it more interactive or engaging or fun? This is why we have the problem we have in our just general federal government. People are like, this is boring, too
yeah.
complicated. How am I even supposed to think about this? So it's fun to have the opportunity to think about government in a new way. That's like, all right, we have this problem. How do we get people interested and involved and engaged? So it's not like my whole thing in creating the Constitution that we kind of hammered home is this Constitution is not for the government. This Constitution is for the people, serves the people, protects the people, like helps the people direct the government in service of the people. But how do we make it fun for the people to use?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I say very similar even with workplace learning, that if we don't keep the learner, which is the employees, if we don't keep them in mind, and
Mhm.
hopefully even get their input, like I'm assuming that y'all got input from other citizens. That's part of why you're having these different meetings. But without that, then yes, then exactly, you don't want to make the Constitution for the government. You want to make it for the people. Just like with learning, it's not about making the learning for the company. It's about making it for the people. Now, there's outcomes that the government or that the company wants, right? So
Certainly.
of course you're keeping that in mind. But yeah, it's funny. I had not really thought about that tie before until you said that. But yeah, it's totally true. Finding
Yeah.
things to engage people and keep them in mind. Oh man. But that goes back to your advocacy work, I think, too, probably.
What I keep saying to my teams is like, okay, when we report out at this monthly meeting, like, can you do some? Yes, the data is important. Can you tell a story that goes with it?
Yeah. Don't just tell me a bunch of numbers. Explain the excitement of it.
Right. It's a little bit like, yeah, when you're learning, can you give me a real life? I love a case study. I
Yeah.
like to see how learning is applied. I'm a real like hands-on. I am not a good, that's a lot. I was going to say, I'm not a good learner by reading, but I am. But I am such a hands-on, like, what is the practical application behind this? I'm always like, okay, this is great to read. Who's doing this already? So yeah, I'm a very like practical application, like hands-on. What's the takeaway? How can we activate this? Like,
Yeah.
what's the action? So
Secret,
yeah,
most people are that way.
yeah, yeah.
So that's not surprising. Well, you kind of touched on about the lifelong learning aspect, and so I'm trying to always wrap up these shows asking my guests, what are you learning right now?
The most fun that I'm having right now learning is what are the best ways that we can bring in grant funding and use it not as grant funding, we're dependent upon grants, but how can we use it as like startup capital,
Mm-hmm.
right? I really love to think of things through the lens of a business startup. And so I'm having a lot of fun thinking about if you were to start a business and the hardest thing to get is capital. If capital were no longer a problem because you're a sovereign government, what are the ways that you would use that funding as capital to transform something into no longer having to be dependent and like spinning it out into be something that it can like develop and grow on its own. So it just is a wonderful simultaneous like thought exercise in like dreaming about what's possible, but also learning about what are the ways that people have already done this? What are the ways that people are not thinking about this? What are the ways that we can be creative with our language to get this funding in ways that we can both be in compliance, but also launch something for the benefit of people that we didn't have before, that didn't exist before in this area.
Taking that grant money that you receive and not treating it as your paycheck, but treating it as startup capital. I think
Yeah.
that's such a great thought process, because now instead of, okay, we have this money, we're good, let's use it. It's we have this money, let's set up the foundation of how we can then continue to grow and be financially independent, I guess. Is that the right way to say
Yeah.
it?
No, exactly. And if what we get, right, are like annual infusions of cash to like continue to grow it and build it, wonderful. But sort of what are the ways that it can grow and be its own entity? What if Congress doesn't appropriate us enough this year? Well, who cares? Because it has become its own thing that we can then infuse, that then the money just becomes a cherry on top that, continues to say, all right, well, this year we're going to use it to build out this piece of it. And this year we're going to use it to build out, while it in and of itself, is able to sustain itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think we're going to be able to do it in every single situation, but it's a path.
Looking for items that connect you to something deeper? Welcome to Wingapo Shop, where tradition meets creativity. Sharing our traditional warmth and friendliness, Wingapo Shop brings you playful designs that honor Indigenous heritage, language, and culture. With roots in the Upper Mattaponi Tribe and Kiowa Pueblo, our collections blend the best of East and West Coast Native influences. Every purchase supports community, culture, and the spirit of unity. Proudly woman-owned by an Upper Mattaponi citizen and her family, Wingapo Shop is your go-to destination for fun Native merch like blankets, t-shirts, footwear, and more. It's not just about what you wear, it's about honoring heritage, celebrating community, and connecting with a culture that's as rich as it is beautiful. Shop our online store today at wingaposhop.com. Wear the culture, honor the heritage. Wingapo Shop, your auntie's favorite Native merch shop. Are there things about this tribe that are unique? Are there particular cultural aspects of art, music, sports? I think we talked a little bit about a sports one, so I'm hoping you'll share about that. But anything like that our listeners who, may be fascinated by the fact that there's this tribe that they never knew about.
One of the things that is difficult, but that we're navigating, is that because of this erasure that happened back in the 20s, and because we're a first contact tribe, right? Like our culture was erased so long ago that now we're doing just a lot of revitalization work. So one of the things that's unique about the Upper Mattaponi in particular is that we do not have reservation land. So we're doing a lot of work to do like land back purchases. And some of that was done early on with like COVID money that we got, just that the entire nation got, right? And one of the things that we used that to do was to open up a clinic, and that includes some home health. So that is a way in which, because we weren't like limited to a reservation, we could buy land and kind of build out things in ways that we want. So we are not limited by our thinking. The whole thing is we became the Upper Mattaponi because they put the Mattaponi on a reservation, and we all used to be one. The Mattaponi, incidentally, do not have federal recognition. And I think part of that is like we ran away and became so independent and so like fiercely self-sufficient that when it was like, okay, federal recognition, and we were all like, oh, okay, let's get organized. Like, and we all went away and like got these skill sets that we've come back together to use to our benefit for each other. But we are, yeah, like I said, we opened the clinic. We have been very, like, education has always been extremely important to the Upper Mattaponi. We do a powwow over Memorial Day weekend. It's pretty cool. Bring your wallet, like save because you will spend, because there's some like gorgeous jewelry and crafts, and Your mind will be blown. And right now we have a tribal citizen and also like another like native person who works for us. He's Saponi. They're down in North Carolina, and they are trying to revitalize shinny, which is like an old native game that was sort of a precursor even to lacrosse. And you can sort of see there are pictures if you like search for like Powhatan Algonquian communities. There's like you'll see like men playing with sticks and a ball, and it really does look like a precursor to lacrosse.
And how do
And
you
they're
spell the name of the game?
it's Shinny.
Shinny. Okay.
So right now there's like a Powhatan Shinny League that's starting up. So each of the tribes has started like buying their own sticks, and like these two guys are they are like hand carving and hand bending their own shinny sticks. The one of them, the Tuppence, who I'm related to, also makes lacrosse sticks. But they are like making their own shinny balls, and like you can buy like goalposts, and they're trying to get together like a Powhatan Shinny League so that each of the tribes will like buy their own sort of equipment and have like intertribal shinny games. Is the
Wow.
goal ultimately. So here on Friday afternoons, when weather permits, they have shinny practice, and like people will come over from the Rappahannock tribe, and people will come over from the Powhatan tribe or the Pamunkey tribe. People from the area will just come around. There's like a handbook to like teach you to play. And yeah, so they're trying to revitalize this sports game that used to be like very native centered in our communities like a million years ago. There are images saved historically of people playing this game. That's really cool. We're doing right now a Powhatan Algonquian language revitalization in partnership with the Chickahominy tribe that's about a half an hour from here. So we meet via Zoom. I'm also a language ambassador for that, to like start language teaching programs for the Upper Mattaponi to like revitalize our language. Yeah, that's a little bit about like what's making us special. That was a long rambling explanation for a question that started, we're almost out of time.
Yeah. It's all right. It's fascinating to think about like those different games, recreational activities, all the cultural things, no matter whether you're talking about an Indian tribe or a foreign country or a region of the US. It's all always so interesting to hear the different things that are specific to a particular group, whatever that is. So it's really interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Desiree, thank you so much. I feel like we could continue talking about the history, and like I have a ton of personal questions I want to know all about your grandmother and all of that. But I really, really appreciate you coming on the show, and I hope folks will be interested enough to look up about the Upper Mattaponi and
Yep.
learn a little bit more about all 7 of the tribes that were more recently recognized. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm so glad to have done it.
My conversation with Desiree had so many tidbits that could relate back to the world of workplace learning and development, but I'm just going to touch on one. When she talked about how the council had to step back and keep in mind that their tribal constitution was for their people and not the government itself, to serve, protect, and help direct the government in service to the people, I thought of how important and how true that is for organizations as well. So often, companies focus their learning efforts in ways that do not take into account their people. In business, obviously, your workforce is there to do the work that's needed to be done to meet organizational goals. However, if you ignore the people when trying to develop them, that's a huge mistake. So remember, when you are thinking about learning and development opportunities, involve your workforce. Keep a focus on what the workforce needs and how they would best receive it and retain it. You've been listening to One More Thing, a radio show on the Power Me Up radio station on iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to you tuning in next time as we continue cultivating your mind with one more thing.
For the Upper Mattaponi, one of the things that becomes very important is because they did try to sort of legislate us out of existence, tried to erase us from history records. We built this church that exists across the street that is really specific to the Upper Mattaponi. And although the tribe is strongly affiliated with the Baptist church across the street, one thing that is really noteworthy is the religion aside, it became a meeting place so that we could conduct tribal business under the auspices of having worship services in some cases. Now, I mean, it functions completely as a church, but one of the things that the church did was allow the tribe to exist and conduct business behind its closed doors. When you're a kid and you go to school, you watch the Disney story of Pocahontas, or in school, they're like, oh, you learn about the Nina the Pinta and the Santa Maria, and they encountered Indians, or John Smith and his team of people, and Pocahontas saved his life. It's all in the books and Colors of the Wind and all that. But what if you could learn the real story of what happened? It makes the whole thing different.
Yeah, and who would tell that story?
Yep. I love it's one of the reasons why Ben and I really like to watch Hamilton, because it gets to the end of like who tells your story. At the end of your life, who tells your story? Who tells the story of the Virginia Indians that first encountered the Powhatan Indians in the 1600s when they first landed here from England? And I think we all have a good sense that the story is whitewashed. You don't want to tell kindergartner the truth. That's terrifying. But you also don't want to be like with the Color of the Wind and the Pocahontas movie from Disney, just one person's story.
Yeah, a rose-colored view of it. And
Yeah.
so y'all are trying to tell in the governing and all setting up processes and all the things that y'all are doing in setting up the government, y'all are trying to tell that story.
I would say we're trying to honor the story. Our whole slogan, I think, that's on our business cards is honoring our past, building our future.
Yeah, I saw that. I love that.
It's a long and sordid origin story, but yeah, I think we're mostly like, where can we go from here?